Hi, Crime Junkie Jury. I'm Lauren Conlin, and I'm back to give you your daily Diddy digest. Everything that happened on day 11, week 3, inside the courtroom. And I should have just listed his charges officially on my first video. So I'll just point out that he is being charged with 2 counts of sex trafficking, 1 count of racketeering, and 2 charges of transportation to engage in prostitution. So today, big day, because the defense actually moved for a mistrial. They were denied, and I'll get to why later. But let's just start off with the first witness, and it was someone from the LAPD, a police officer named Christopher Ignacio, and he's a 16-year vet, and he was called to the scene of a possible breaking and entering in December of 2011, which we know was Kid Cudi. It was Kid Cudi's residence. So Ignacio testified that around 8:20 a.m. he was dispatched over to the Hollywood Hills for this possible breaking and entering. So he said that he went there with his partner. The lights and the sirens were on just in case. They didn't know what to expect. So when they got there, he testified that he saw a black Cadillac SUV with tinted windows parked outside of the house. And when he pulled up, they kind of drove away. And then shortly after that, a black Porsche pulled up, and that was the homeowner, aka Kid Cudi or Scott Mescudi. So Officer Ignacio testified that he went inside the house with his partner. They met 2 other detectives there. He saw opened gifts from Chanel. He didn't say Chanel. He just said open gifts, watches, purses, which Kid Cudi said were from Chanel, and Christmas presents for his family. And they said that there was nothing missing for the homeowner. And, they searched around the house twice in the backyard, making sure everything was okay. And about 20 minutes later, he testified, Officer Ignacio, that he went outside and he saw the black Cadillac SUV again coming down the hill by the house. And he actually said that he memorized the license plate. And he told us this on the stand. He said the license plate without any type of hesitation at all. So then he said he got back to his squad car, looked it up on whatever database they have, and it was registered to Bad Boy Productions. And then, that was that. So then the cross-examination was done by Brian Steele, who many of you know was Young Thug's attorney during the YSL trial. Crazy, but he's got great pace. I have to say we got through this very quickly, and he wanted to just point out a couple things, like, hey, this case didn't exactly stick out to you, this whole B&E thing, right? Like, you just you only know about this now because you had to testify. This was nothing, right? And it turns out the report he made, this Officer Ignacio, it was a trespassing report. It actually wasn't even a breaking and entering. So he asked Officer Ignacio, did you see at any point the black Porsche pull up next to the Cadillac Escalade? Because if you recall, Capricorn Clark, during her testimony, talked about this chase, this high-speed chase where Kid Cudi drove away and Diddy, they drove off after him and she was in the back seat, up the hill, down the hill, until Kid Cudi lost them. So Brian Steele's like, did you ever see this, the Porsche pull up to the SUV? And he said, no. And he just said, yeah, no, I didn't see any of that. And he said, so you didn't see any type of cars chasing other cars? And he's like, nope, didn't see anything. So that was interesting. He also said, when you spoke to the homeowner about this possible B&E or this trespassing, did the homeowner mention that a gun was involved? And he said, no. And Steele said, well, that would be something that you would want to put in your report because it's important, right? And he said, yes. And then he just said, did he mention, the homeowner mention a kidnapping? No. Well, that would be something you put in your report. And he was doing that clearly because Capricorn Clark said that Diddy had a gun, and she told this to Kid Cudi and Cassie on the phone, as well as saying that she was kidnapped. So Kid Cudi left those details out to the police officer. And that was pretty much the last thing that he wanted to point out was that he was dispatched, Officer Ignacio, at 8:20, and Capricorn Clark testified that this happened between 6 and 7 a.m. So he wanted to point out the time discrepancies, but that was that. Pretty cut and dry. Then we got to the next witness for the government, arson investigator Lance Jimenez. And he's a 22-year vet at the LAFD. And an arson investigator, he said, is basically a detective for the fire department to look into how certain fires are started. And so he was called in January of 2012, which we know is when the Molotov cocktail was thrown into Kid Cudi's car. And so he talks about, showing up to the scene. And, he talked about how Kid Cudi's driveway was very long, and we saw a picture of it on the screen. And I was surprised. And I was also surprised at how close the Porsche was to the garage. And there was 2 cars parked behind the Porsche as well. That was kind of surprising. I pictured in my mind this car being standalone, even kind of outside of the house, like outside of these gates that Kid Cudi has. We've seen images of the outside of his house many times. And we just saw, his house kind of as a whole today when we were able to see the garage. So he talked about how his assumption when he arrived on the scene, and by the way, the fire department was already there. He got there a few hours later to investigate. He talked about how his expert opinion was that somebody had cut a hole in the top of the Porsche and then dropped the Molotov cocktail in there. And he said the reason that there wasn't more damage to the car, because the car didn't actually explode. It was charred, it was burnt, but the outside was fine. And, a lot of the inside was fine. It was mainly the passenger seat, the console, and the driver's seat. But he said this was because there was a silk scarf used that was put in the bottle in the gasoline. And by the way, the bottle was an Old English malt liquor bottle. So this scarf, by the way, this silk scarf, it looked to be like a designer Hermes type of scarf. So that was also something that I noted. And then he talked about the fingerprints. And this is where I'm getting to the mistrial. So he talked about how DNA was lifted. I'm sorry, not fingerprints. Yes, DNA was lifted. They did have fingerprints, but they only got partial DNA from those on certain pieces of evidence, like the lighter and the bottle, which I'm discussing. And then there was one more thing. The lighter, the bottle, and then the scarf. So they were able to get a partial female DNA sample from the bottle. So they were working with the LAPD to take fingerprints off of Kid Cudi's door from the trespassing incident in December of 2011. And they were going to try to match any of the DNA samples or fingerprints that they could lift off of the arson evidence. And so they talked about how they obtained these print cards, like fingerprint cards from the door from the LAPD, and or they had them in their possession. But somehow in August of 2012, the print cards from the trespassing incident were destroyed. And the government asked Jimenez, did you order those to be destroyed? And he said no. And then, they went on and said, is it unusual that evidence like that would be destroyed? And they kind of went on about this. And there was an objection from the defense after they asked if it was unusual, and it was sustained. And then there was a sidebar, and then we had a break. And then when we came back, that's when the mistrial was brought up, and I'll explain why. When the defense moved for a mistrial, they said that the government was inferring that Diddy paid someone off, at the LAPD to destroy evidence. And during jury selection, and just a big point of contention within the jury, and they experienced this because jury selection was well over a week, and they said that it came up a lot that people thought that Diddy could pay his way out of things, and as any celebrity could pay their way out of things. So Shapiro was like, we can't get this out of their head. This was such a big thing for so many people, and the government knew what they were doing. They were inferring that he's paying people off, and and now he's not going to get a fair trial. And the government was just like, no, just disregard it. We understand. You can disregard that testimony. like apologies if, they didn't apologize, but they were just kind of backtracking, being like, we didn't infer anything. So Shapiro went on to say, well, okay, if you're not going to grant us a mistrial, because of course the judge denied it, and I'll back up. He denied it because he said that they didn't object until the very last question, which was, do you find it unusual to see evidence destroyed like this, not by your directive? That's what they asked to the arson investigator. And, the questions prior I kind of mentioned were just like, did you authorize this? Did you know it was being destroyed? Stuff like that. And they didn't object. So he just kind of said, you didn't object until the last question, and I sustained it. So sorry. So yes, back to Shapiro. She just said, okay, well, if you won't grant us a mistrial, please instruct the jury that the government, they asked an improper question, and essentially they were being improper. And the government countered with, no, it's not exactly fair for the judge to call us improper. That would just be just prejudice against us. So, and the judge eventually just said, okay, I'm just going to have the jury, I'm going to instruct them to disregard the questions and disregard the answers. And that's exactly what he did. And then for the defense cross-examination, which was done by Mark Agnifilo, he focused on a couple things. He really was hyper-focused on this black glove that was found in the back seat of Kid Cudi's car. It was like in the corner. And the investigator, Jimenez, he said, that was his driving glove. And Agnifilo said, well, did you test it for DNA evidence? And he said, no, the owner of the car said it was his to drive. And he said, well, why is it in the back seat? Why is there only one? And it was just like black glove. And I was like, oh, OJ. But I think, his point was that, and he also brought up the fact that Kid Cudi told the investigator to reach out to Capricorn Clark and to Cassie Ventura. And he was kind of saying, oh, well, did you reach out to them after the female partial DNA came back? And he said, no, I don't remember. I really don't remember if it was before or after. It was just because Kid Cudi told us to. He said that he didn't get in touch with Cassie. She didn't answer her phone. He actually got in touch with her dad, who is a firefighter himself. And then with Capricorn Clark, he said that at one point he called her multiple times. Her brother answered and kind of told him to, stop calling. So I think Agnifilo's whole thing was, well, it could have been anybody here. You just didn't talk to them and you didn't test everything, that you should have. You didn't test all of the evidence that was, around the car. And then we got to the direct testimony of Deontay Nash, who is Cassie's very close friend and also a celebrity stylist. He worked for Diddy and Cassie from 2008 up until 2018. And he talked a lot about the violence that Cassie experienced at the hands of Diddy and what Deontay himself witnessed, and also what Deontay experienced at the hands of Diddy. And, not to minimize anything, but this testimony was a lot of what we heard before from Carrie Morgan, Cassie's former best friend, from Don Richard, just incidents of Diddy beating Cassie. So I'll go into, a couple of them, maybe two of them, but he said that he heard Diddy call her all these names, awful names, and he said that it would make Cassie cry. He talked about how there was a 2014 Vanity Fair party, which is the Oscars after party. He and Cassie showed up, and Cassie's hair was down and pretty, and Diddy was there, and he kind of like picked up Deontay by his jacket, Deontay described, and said, hey, I told you I wanted her hair to be up. And so, he rushes to the bathroom with Cassie. He pins her hair up with somebody else, and then they come back out, and Diddy said, oh, I guess it did look better down. So there was that was one thing that he talked about, Diddy kind of getting violent with him. He said at another point, we heard this testimony actually from Cassie, just an incident where Deontay, Mia, who is actually victim 4, who we're going to hear from, she's a Diddy assistant and also Cassie's friend, Deontay, Mia, and Cassie were at her apartment in LA after doing some day drinking or going out, and they were packing for Cassie to go on some music festival thing, it was in Canada somewhere. But Cassie fell asleep on the couch, and I guess Diddy was knocking at the door. Deontay answered, and he kind of pushed through and said, I told that B to answer her phone. And then he, ripped Cassie off of the couch by her hair and started wailing on her. And at one point, Deontay said he jumped on his back to get Diddy to stop. And then he was thrown off. And then Mia jumped on his back trying to get him to stop. And at that point, Diddy just kept kicking and beating Cassie until she hit the side of her head on a bed frame and she started bleeding everywhere. And then he said Diddy got very nervous. And Deontay said he started to call 911, but he hung up and he doesn't remember why, but he just went and got towels for Cassie. And Diddy sent his bodyguard to get her and take her to a plastic surgeon. So, and again, we had heard this incident before from Cassie. It was very disturbing. And then there was another time, this was a little bit more, I guess, intricate, but I don't know what this fight was about. We're not really sure, but Deontay and Cassie were cooking at her apartment. Diddy kind of busted in and said, I need to talk to Cassie. He ends up physically pushing her and saying, get the F out of his apartment. I guess he paid for that apartment. And then he did the same thing to Deontay, pushed him and kind of slapped him upside the head. Now, Cassie and Diddy are still fighting. And Deontay says, I'm leaving after he kind of got pushed. So he goes down to the valet to get his car. And Diddy's security is there. And he's like, okay, this is kind of weird. And he said, Cassie and Diddy come down. He said, Cassie's crying. And they finally get in his car. And Diddy's just talking crap to them, saying, you broke this, like, get out of here, whatever. So they drive off, Cassie and Deontay. And then Diddy calls Cassie. He says, pull over. They do. And then he comes up to the car, where they are. They weren't very far. And he starts saying things to Cassie, like, if you don't do XYZ, which again, I still don't exactly know what that is. He said, I'll release the sex tapes that I have of you. And he said, I'll release them to your parents' work. And, your brother's a B, and like, he's the only one that would ever protect her. And so at that point, he finally leaves the car and they drive, and Cassie's crying. And Deontay says, why don't I just drop you here on Sunset so you can get a taxi and go to a hotel that's safer? So she does. He goes home. She goes to the La Montrose Hotel. Well, Diddy shows up with his bodyguards at Deontay's house, and Deontay said he starts looking everywhere for Cassie. And by the way, Deontay was kind of a sassy witness. He, they'd be like, how are you, sir? And Deontay would be like, blessed, like on the stand. It was kind of funny. But he said, Diddy was looking for her everywhere. He goes, he looked in my oven, and I don't know why. So then he took Deontay's phone, and Deontay was getting a call from the La Montrose Hotel, and Diddy's like, oh, okay, cool, she's there. Let's go there. So they go to the La Montrose Hotel, and Diddy takes Deontay's phone and says, go get her. She'll come down with you. And apparently Deontay said he got Cassie's room number from the front desk, which I thought was odd, but he did. And he goes up with a bodyguard, and Cassie kind of jumped when they were able to get in the door. And they said, Diddy's looking for you. And he said that he said that she said that she was basically going to go over the balcony. Those were his words. She went to the balcony and said she was going to go over, which, you can interpret however you want. But then the bodyguard, D-Rock, I believe, said, we'll take you at the side entrance. So they do. Deontay goes downstairs. And by the way, D-Rock is one of Diddy's main bodyguards. So Deontay goes down to the lobby and says, sorry to Diddy, she left. Diddy's kind of mad, but he's like, whatever. So Deontay says he leaves, but he goes to a hotel. He did not feel safe going home. And he said when he did get home the next day, his backpack was stolen, which had $1,000 cash, his ID, his laptop, or his iPad. And he said he kept that cash for him or for Cassie in case of emergency. So if they had to go to a hotel, they wouldn't have to use their name, which I was like, oh my goodness. He also discussed an incident in Vegas where he witnessed an escort knock on the door to their room. They were on the same floor. Also said Cassie didn't want to go out that night, but Diddy kind of forced her to. He talked about Cassie's 29th birthday, where she was forced to do an FO on her birthday and said she didn't want to. And he also testified that she told him, she didn't want to do these FOs, but she did it for Diddy because he wanted her to. And then there was a lot of talk about Cassie's music career and how Diddy would control it. And with this mixtape that she did, it was out for free. And Diddy said, okay, if the downloads are good, we'll put it out there for money, for where people can actually pay for it, etc. And he said that never happened. It was a lot of similar testimony to her other friends about her drug use, how she was very addicted to pills, as was Diddy. And also he said that he didn't hate Diddy. He was asked, how do you feel about the defendant? And he's like, I don't hate him. And he said, he admitted that he still texted with Diddy after he stopped working for him in 2018, which was also when Cassie and Diddy broke up. And Cassie and Deontay are still very close. He made that very clear. Now, during cross-examination with Xavier Donaldson, and we are not finished, by the way, I feel like I'll get into more detail tomorrow because it was tough to see where this cross was going. It was a lot of like, hey, you said that you didn't really want to be here to testify, Deontay. You got subpoenaed. The government forced you. And he's like, yeah. And then it was like, well, why did you bring your lawyer to meet with the government? You said you didn't have any plans to make any demands of Mr. Combs or to sue Mr. Combs civilly. And he's like, no, I don't. And Donaldson was just like, okay, let me give you this transcript. Does this refresh your memory or give you something? It was, we couldn't see it as in the courtroom, but he's reading it and he's like, nope, I still don't remember considering ever suing him. And then he was asked about some meetings he had with the government, and he was high for one of them, I guess. And Maureen Comey, the prosecutor's like, okay, we'll stop the meeting early. He also, Donaldson brought up that, your career started at Bad Boy. You were an intern and now you're like this big celebrity stylist. Like, would you say Diddy is responsible for launching your career? And he said yes. He was also asked about, because he talked a lot about music and Cassie's music career. He's kind of like, okay, well, how do you know music so well? You're a stylist. And I don't know if anyone picked up on that. I definitely did. And as I said, he was just a sassy witness. I mean, at one point, Donaldson asked him about Cassie. I think he said Ms. Ventura, and he's like, Mrs. Fine. It was a moment. It was a funny moment. But yeah, I'll get into more of the cross tomorrow because I think it's just going to be wrapped up with a bow. But that was pretty much the extent of what happened today. And I hope that I was clear for everybody. And I try to be concise, but here we are. But anyway, yes, I will see you all tomorrow. Crime Junkie Jury. Thanks for listening.